Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Jeff Poole.
And I'm Joe Lallo.
And we've got a cool guest for you this week, fantasy author Alex Liddell, who's just killing it right now with her books over there on Amazon. She started out as an Amazon Breakthrough Novel Awards finalist author with The Cadet of Tildor, and it was published from Penguin. And she's since had several Amazon Top 100 Kindle bestsellers, such as Power of Five and Mistake of Magic. She's an avid horseback rider, she put bad, not me, hockey player, and an ice cream addict. Born in Russia, Alex learned English in elementary school, where a thoughtful librarian placed a copy of Tamara Pierce's Alana in Alex's hands. In addition to becoming the first English book Alex read for fun, Alana started Alex's lifelong love for fantasy books. She currently lives in Washington, D.C., and we're going to be asking her about YA fantasy, and she's also doing reverse harem stuff right now, so we're going to get the lowdown on all of that. Welcome to the show, Alex. Would you like to say anything to introduce yourself that I did not successfully steal from your Amazon bio?
No, thank you very much for the awesome intro, Lindsay. And just to tie together between romance, harem, and young adult, which does seem like a wide spectrum, I'd say all of my books are still focusing on kick-ass heroines in fantasy worlds. So wherever on the spectrum that lie, that still is maintained within my brand there.
Awesome. It's very good if you can have a tagline like that. I'm not sure I can have one that encompasses all my stuff, but I'm always envious of people who do it, since that is one of the recommended things for marketing. Why don't you tell us kind of how you first got started with that first novel, and maybe the contest, and how you got published with Penguin?
So the contest that was running at the time, it had several stages. Amazon at the time had partnered with Penguin, where lots of people submitted their manuscripts. It went through several rounds of reviews until it enters the top 3, which are the finalists. And they brought us all to Seattle, and we found out the winner at that point. The interesting takeaway from that is I entered the contest twice. The Cadet of Tildor, at the time it was under Service of the Crown title. It was completely finished the year before I became the finalist. And that was the year I stayed up till midnight to, the minute the contest opened, to enter it, and was all excited. I did not make it to the finals. And after that, I spent a year querying agents, and by the time that year had finished, I was done. I had only entered the contest again because my friends were doing it. I guess it was still running. Why not? I had entered it with the exact same manuscript that did not go anywhere the previous year. I wasn't entering it by that point to win, unlike the first year where I was all excited. I was just like, why not? In fact, I put down a pen name that I forgot, so that when the appropriate round came, I looked, I didn't see my name, and I said, hey, whatever. Same thing that happened. I didn't realize that I had forgotten my pen name. I had then changed it later in publication, but that was the exact same manuscript. It got different eyes, and it got selected at that point, which reinforces the idea that if a manuscript is not picked up by a particular agent, by a particular publisher, it does not mean it's a bad manuscript. It's just not a match at the time. So that's my story of... In terms of at the end of the contest, I was a finalist. I wasn't the winner. However, I signed with an agent during that time, and we had a deal from Penguin within 24 hours.
Well, that makes me actually feel really good, because I entered that contest probably the last year it was running. Unfortunately, this is defunct now, but and I didn't even make it to like the first cutoff stage, which I think was like 1,000, the top 1,000 books or something. So my ego was crushed.
Yeah, but So that's the story. Entered it twice. The first time it washed out. The second time it became one of top 3 finalists. So don't read too much into a manuscript not being selected for something.
Well, that's good to know, and it's good that being persistent paid off in that case. And even though this one's gone, there's still a lot of contests out there that have sort of, can draw the attention of agents and publishers if that's what you're interested in. I know especially RWA is really proactive with doing their Rita, I think it's the Rita Award, and some of those ones that you can enter and, actually, if you're looking for that deal, it can be a way in the door. Did you enjoy your experience with Penguin, or were there things that you wanted to do differently that you couldn't because you had a traditional deal?
Yes, to both. Publishing with Penguin was an amazing experience. It was like getting a master's degree in writing. Um, what my the types of things my editor got out of my writing, I equate to raising a puppy. When I submitted it, it was the absolute best, most awesome puppy I could have possibly bred and socialized and groomed. But it took my editor there to really turn it into a full size attack dog. Um, so it was amazing. In terms of, are there things that are frustrating about traditional publishing? Absolutely. It's the yin and the yang of indie publishing. So it's there are lots of things you can't control. So while you have the most amazing, awesome editor, you work on your editor's time schedule, right? It goes hand in hand. Instead of a business owner, you're more like a contractor. They're paying you to produce the book that they want. Versus in the indie world, it's completely different. So there are I'm not going to say there are more frustrations in traditional publishing than indie or less frustrations. I'm going to say that they are absolute opposite frustrations.
Now, the question I was going to ask was like, did you learn anything working with a major publisher? It seems like you learned an awful lot working with a major publisher. So I guess a more apt question would be, when you were working with the editor and sort of learning what makes a professional book,
Yes.
do you feel like, do you feel the advice that you're receiving was sort of universal or catered to your book? Like, how personal attention do you feel like you were getting?
Oh my God, it was very, very much catered to my book. It put me absolutely through the ringer in a way that I would never have been able to do myself. It forced me to become a much, much better writer. So the quality of the craft, at least for me, that I went through with Penguin, the writer that I came in as and the writer that I came out as were two completely different writers. So from a craft perspective,
Um, I know a lot of people, like, especially if you're an indie and you've been an indie for a while, and then suddenly you start working with an editor who's like telling you, no, you're doing this wrong, you should do this right. Did you feel like, did you have any pushback where like, well, no, this is my voice, this is the thing? Were you precious at all, or do you think that like you took all of the advice to heart?
Uh, Joe, that's actually a really, really good question. So I went through about 5 rounds of like deep developmental editing, and we kept, I'll say, we kept the soul of the book. Everything else got changed. Um, I will give you an example of. Oh, I will give you an example of some things that we changed that was a major thing. When I submitted the book, half of it's a story about um, a girl who is the only girl in a fantasy version of a military school. So it's a 16-year-old girl, and we're writing a young adult novel. In the original manuscript that I submitted, about half the chapters were from her perspective, from Renee's perspective, and then about half the chapters were from the perspective of her male instructor. And the first thing I was told is, we can't put a book out for a young adult book where half the chapters are from an adult's perspective. So we went ahead and we changed that. Another example, if you open the flap currently of the Cadet of Tildor, and it's got that cover copy that the editor writes, and it starts out with, there's a new king on the throne of Tildor. Well, that king never existed in the original version. It got edited in at about round 3 of editing. At some point, it started to feel like stone soup. We need to add this and add this and add this. My agent was great about having a conversation of what I should be pushing back on and what I shouldn't be pushing back on. That was another learning experience of when I'm working with a major house editor, what is fair game to push on and what isn't fair game to push on.
Okay, so Alex, my question for you is, was the young adult fantasy a genre you had always intended to write in?
Yes, ever since. It's the genre that I read, it's the genre that I love, and it started, as Lindsay saw there on Amazon, it really did start with Tamara Pierce and Alana, the book Alana.
So what tropes do you feel should be included in every young adult fantasy novel, just for anyone that's thinking about getting into the genre?
Excellent question. And if we're talking about reverse harem, there are tropes there. Young adult, I don't have an answer to that. I find young adult books to be much more, I want to use the word diverse, though I'm not using that word correctly. I don't feel that young adult genre has a mandatory tropes that readers feel that they must see, as opposed to the romance genre, which is escapism fantasy, where people want to read about the specific fantasy that they are interested in. So there's a little bit more of a trope contract with the reader in the reverse harem that I write that is not in the young adult.
It does seem that within young adult, you would have all the same subgenres that we have in adult fiction. So the tropes may be like, what do you see in young adult space opera may have, different stuff that you want to hit on than YA fairy tales, I guess. I did want to ask you a little more about the fantasy genres you write in, but I am curious, just before we jump into that some more, is what made you decide after your first book to go into self-publishing?
Remember how I said the yin and the yang? I wanted to use a different part of my brain. I always wanted to try my hand at small business, and this is self-publishing is like running a business, and I enjoy it very much. It's a different thing. Uh, I'm not opposed to going back to traditional. Well, to go in parallel right now, it's wouldn't be a financially smart decision for me. But later on, I'm totally open to it. It's a completely different game. So this is a business approach here.
Definitely. And I feel like you almost have to be willing to embrace that a little bit to succeed with self-publishing. It's not many people that just publish it and it gets, everybody loves it and it's a big hit.
I agree. I mean, the business aspect of it is one of the things that attracted me. I wanted to try my hand in business, and have that business be writing.
We've heard from a lot of folks that YA can be kind of a tough genre to do well in self-publishing, since we're mostly ebook driven right now. That's where most of our revenue comes from. And as we've discussed before on the show, most teenagers don't have credit cards, and if they have Amazon accounts, it's sort of at their parents' will probably. Have you come across challenges with selling to the YA audience?
Keeping in mind that I have biased data means my data is self-selected. I know who's reading my books because those readers are telling me that they're reading my books, right? So there's a self-selection bias there. But if my Cadet of Tildor books are primarily going into the hands of teens and some adults. Then my indie YA books, I don't think are primarily going to young adults. I think they're going to adults who enjoy reading young adult stories. So adults like me, I enjoy reading young adult stories. A lot of my purchases are young adult books, but I would say my target audience, even though I'm writing young adult, are not actual young adults.
That's about what we've heard from other authors too, that it's the
You set
adults
me
picking
up.
them up first.
You
Well, I
set
am
me
always,
up.
you never know. We did have somebody who was big on Instagram and kind of reaching that YA audience. So I'm always curious if it's possible or,
Joe,
if it's
adjust your
adults first.
corset over there and back me up, saying that she set me up.
Well, we always seek differing viewpoints.
Hablo español solamente ahora el presente.
And minute number 13 is where the show went off the rails. No, but let me ask you, you're kind of in the YA, like secondary world fantasy, and then the reverse harem. Are those also secondary world?
Explain secondary world.
Not Earth, like you made up the world.
Yes, it's a magically existing world that's kind of like ours, but has different continents and a little weird sounding names. Yes.
No, that's what I love. And I just wanted to clarify for folks, that you're doing really well right now in that, sometimes the urban fantasy contemporary Earth authors have an easier time. It seems like there can be a bigger market for that. What are your thoughts on sort of the health of the genre, the readership out there? Was it hard to break in, or do you feel like there's a hungry market out there?
For which one? I think the market is very different.
Right. Well, for both, maybe. I know reverse harem's kind of a new thing that's trending right now, but I feel like, high fantasy, made up fantasy is a classic thing that's always been with us, but it maybe is not as popular as, like I said, the Earth stuff.
Since I've never written in real world based stuff, I don't have a basis of comparison for you there. If you're asking for me in general, the competition of the young adult market versus the reverse harem market, which is not what you're asking, but how I twisted the question to actually answer something that I know the answer to, or I have a good guess. Young adult market, you're competing with traditional. Have competition of a long backlist of books. Reverse harem, even if it's going to come out traditional, it's so new that you do not have competition from there. You do not have competition beyond when the genre started, about a year and a half ago. So there is a very different, there's a very different set of books against which you're competing, and doing well in each genre. That's kind of my new thing, is when I'm talking to authors and we're talking about doing well or killing it. My question is, how do you know? How do you know you're doing well? Doing well according to what? What are your comps? What's your research? What does a book in your genre, what's considered doing well? And the answer for that, when I researched my young adult novels with Aaron Ash, and when I was setting those milestones and goals, doing well is defined differently in terms of rank, in terms of gross revenue, than it is currently in the reverse harem market. Now, 2 years from now, this may change completely. I don't know. The reverse harem market will still be there in 2 years. Young adult market is a much longer market. It's much more established. But I'd say that doing well needs to be qualified by what is well in your subgenre.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Also, it means what's doing well just for you personally as a person, because if your bills are getting paid, it doesn't really matter how much better you can do. But I have a question now. Let's say that somebody's trying to get started writing in, let's say, YA fantasy.
Okay.
Obviously, it's useful to sort of be familiar with the genre. Hopefully, you already enjoy it. But let's say that you think you might have a knack for it, and you'd like to sort of become conversant in the subject matter. Is there, like, what would you say is like the quintessential like young adult author or series or book, just sort of so people can study up on the genre and sort of understand how to write a good one?
Interesting question. Well, so let's say you're looking to enter. Let me ask you some questions. Let me ask you some questions back then to be able to answer it back. We're pretending you're a new author, right? And you're
Yeah.
looking to enter the young adult market.
Yes.
Okay, why the young adult market?
Let's, for the purposes of this show, let's
Yes.
say that you were like, well, it seems like young adult market is doing pretty well, and I feel like that's what I have the skills for.
Okay, so if you have the skills for it, that means that you've done some reading and understand some basics of what young adult is. If we're talking craft, right, I would steer you very heavily towards a book by Orson Scott Card called Characters and Viewpoint,
Mhm.
which is not specific to young adult, but it is specific to writing craft. And young adult books do a lot of character exploration. If middle grade books is more outside world plot based, young adult has an expectation of inner character development, that growth, that understanding the world as through a loss of innocence through maturing eyes. And uh, Character and Viewpoint does a great job of teaching you how to write characters well. So given the information you gave me, which you told me you're interested in young adult because you've already read it, so you have some idea of where you are. Now it's a question how to write it well. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Alrighty. So one question I always enjoy asking our guests, now that you've published a number of titles, is there anything you wish you could have done differently with any of them?
No.
That's an awesome answer. I don't think I've ever had anyone yet that has told me no. Alrighty. Well, in that case, let me hand you back over to Lindsay there, because you make a nice,
He didn't
quick,
have
easy
time
question.
to type in the chat and pass it off.
Exactly. I was in the process of typing. I was like, oh, okay, well, vocal introduction it is.
I'm feeling that Alex may be a troublemaker. I don't know. I'm just starting to get this sense. But let me ask you, Alex, you started with YA fantasy, as we've been discussing, and then you've recently switched to reverse harem. Were you worried about your audience objecting or any negative reactions from your current readers?
Yes, I was very worried about it. Those worries were not founded. I put out some feelers to my newsletter and said, hey, I hear reverse harem is the new black. What do you guys think? And I got a lot of responses. Some were positive, some were negative, but man, people had an opinion. And the fact that they had an opinion was a good thing. It hit an emotional nerve, whatever it was. I was surprised. I went in with the expectation that I would be looking at a new readership, and I kept my newsletter and my mailing list, up to date, that I'm doing this and I'm trying this. Uh, but I didn't expect to be getting a lot of feedback from them once the books came out. I was surprised by the number of people that went over to read, even if it was, oh, let me see what silliness this is. So I was surprised. But again, going back to what you asked me earlier, you said, how are teens buying books? And I said, I don't think my audience are teens. I think my audience are adults who enjoy young adult books, and they seem to be willing to give this a try, maybe to see what the hype is about, maybe to go with my writing. But there's been a lot of crossover, a lot less from reverse harem over to my young adult books, but a lot more from young adult to reverse harem.
Do you want to go ahead and define reverse harem? I guess we should have done that first for those listeners who may have heard it but not quite know what it is yet.
Sure. Reverse harem is a type of romance where, for some reason of the plot, one girl is in love with multiple guys and everybody is good with this arrangement. So this isn't a triangle where who is she going to choose? The whole idea is why choose. So there's some plot reason why this is all okay, while why several guys are all in love with this girl and eventually happily ever after. Again, going back to the trope question, right? And I said reverse harem has those tropes that I'm not seeing in young adult. Uh, it's a romance. You're expected to provide the readers with a happily ever after ending in romance. That is a trust you have with the readers, and that this ending in reverse harem is going to include the heroine having a happily ever after with all the guys and everybody being happy together.
This is one genre, I think, where it might actually be easier to swing if you're writing in a made-up fantasy world instead of Earth customs and mores. You could, I mean, I don't know how you do it, but you could just, that could be normal for the culture. Do you play with that a lot, or is it, because you said everybody's cool with it. So is that what you do, is kind of make it, build it into the culture of the world you make up?
So remember, I write fantasy, so I'm in a different world. Yes, in my case, the way I got around it was my world, my fantasy world has quints, which is magic chooses five five Fey warriors to connect into a greater power. And suddenly, one warrior dies, and magic chooses a human female. And it must be a mistake. But the magic has bonded them together. So there's the explanation there. Other other explanations that I've seen in various reverse harem writings have been these are the protectors who have always been meant to protect this heroine. A group of friends who are such close friends that they agree that they just want to have one girlfriend altogether. A group of brothers, that's also a popular one, that are so attached to each other and share everything that they're going to be sharing the female as well. Notice that the males are not sexually involved with each other. That is acceptable in some romance, in some reverse harem, but that is by no means expected. So that's why you do get a lot of brothers, cousins, family members. Some alternate worlds where there are not enough females, so it's expected that every female takes many males.
All right, great. Thank you for that explanation, because I actually, I didn't know that. I could see where you're not crossing the line into a male-male romance, which could limit the readers more. I mean, I suppose anyway, it's kind of a special reader that's going to be open to this, but it's interesting to kind of know the rules. And I have to ask you, because most of the ones I've seen have really like man chest kind of covers, you know, the half nude people on the front, and I assume they're fairly explicit. Your covers are very kind of in line with your other stuff. Are there rules about, like, do people expect it to be explicit, or is it okay to do a romance where it's kissing or fade to black?
I think you're not. I think you're misreading the genre in the covers you're looking at. A reverse harem prefers the cover to focus on the female. So the man chest covers are romance covers, but it's rare that man chest covers are covers for reverse harems. Most reverse harems feature the girl in the forefront because it's all about her.
Right. I guess I should have said her with the three hunky guys around her.
But in terms of steam level, they vary. I'd say mine is about mid-steam.
All right. Well, very cool. For those who are interested in checking it out, it does seem to be. Do you feel like in a year and a half or so you've been doing it, that it's gotten more competitive now, or is it still maybe open to new authors that want to jump in?
I haven't been doing it for a year and a half. I've been doing indie publishing for a year and a
Mm.
half. I only entered the reverse harem market this May.
So you must feel that there are opportunities because you've been doing well. All right. I did want to ask you, kind of moving on before we jump into the marketing stuff. You have something on your website I noticed that said you do, is it 3D character rendering that people can use for cover art? I was curious about that because it looked really inexpensive and maybe
Hey
something.
Joe, she's doing it again. She heard about 3D from Sarah Wilson and she's claiming to have researched it on my website.
And I saw it on your website. And I remember we had Sarah on and mentioned she was doing it for her Dragon School series.
Hey, I saw it on Shutterstock. Very nicely done, by the way.
Huh, thank you. I like your research.
Oh, but I'll ask about it. I mean, do you? I saw on Shutterstock, you've got some, a bunch of people there, and there's a couple pictures there with some wolves involved. Do you limit yourself to certain species, or were you pretty much open to anything? Like, for instance, dragons, griffins, anything like that?
So, answering both yours and I think the question Lindsay meant to ask before I interrupted her together, 3D renders are, it's like playing with Legos where the Legos are body parts. So I uh, I buy, right, these body parts, poses, uh, animals, expressions, hair, clothing, and then you combine them together to get the character. So uh, I have, let's say, a lot of dragon parts, right? So I can do a lot of dragons. I bought some wolf components because I shade in my book is a shifter and because just wolves look really cute and I wanted some.
That's got, you've got to have a heck of an icebreaker when you're meeting people for the first. Man, I just bought some awesome arms and a few legs and maybe a couple wings in there. And
um, in reality, you're not buying separate arms and legs. You're buying the whole body of one type,
yeah.
but you might be buying the skin separately, for this shade. Uh, so in terms of, yeah, go ahead, because I'm
No, and I was just
starting
going to say, say if I contacted you and say I've got a dragon with this coloring or doing something or other. I mean, how much you typically charge to do something you're rendering here?
Okay.
You don't mind me
So,
asking?
no, absolutely not. So first, I would manage your expectations, and I would go back to the Legos of body parts, saying I can get you about probably 90% to your perfection. If you want 100%, that's where you go to the illustrator. And that is why you're seeing the price point difference of, $25 for a render, $50 for a render, depending on what we're doing, a little more, depending on whether I already own the things we would need for your character or they need to be purchased, how many figures you would need, and things like that. So that's why you're looking at those types of numbers as low as 25, 50, a little more with what you're buying, versus an illustrator where you're looking at $750,000 on the low end, but you're also going to get about 90% of what you want. So what I would tell you is, all right, you want a dragon, I can give you these 4 colors of dragon to choose from. Which one would you like? Well, I'd really like a green polka dotted one. Okay, your cover designer could do that in Photoshop. That's not what I'm going to render. Here are the choices that I can give you. Here are the positions that I can give you. So I would work with you at that point to find what we can do. Because, as I said, we can usually get about 90% there. I recommend renders as an alternative to illustration after you've looked at photo stock and you know what's available for you in photo stock. If you decide that none of that works for you, that often happens with diverse characters, that happens with fantasy characters where that just don't exist in stock. And that's when renders are a good option.
Now, I'm not sure if you would know the answer to this, but
I'll make it up if I don't.
well, excellent. Let's say you are interested and you know you're going to have the same heroine or the protagonist through your entire series, and you
Yes.
want 100%. You want it to look exactly the way you want it to look. Is there a way to sort of hire somebody to commission precisely the parts that you need to make the person look exactly the way you want, and then just sort of have that in the toolbox?
That's called an illustrator.
Well, I mean,
Probably.
oh, okay.
Prob if you came to me and you said, well, I want it exactly this way. Let's take your example one step further and say I would like you know I have a 10-year-old son and I would really like a render that looks exactly like him. Can I hire an artist to create that? And the answer is yes, you can. That is artist is not going to be me. I could get you a render that would be 90% there to look like your kid, but it's not going to be 100%. And if you want 100%, then I'd again point you to either an illustrator or in the render to some of the artists that do that work. But at that point, again, you're looking at the same type of price tag. Does
So
that
I
does
think
that answer the question?
Yes.
I think my cover art people have started doing some of this too. It sounds like the same thing. They're able to they said I could pick a Photoshop models and they just needed the head, and then they could buy like these sci-fi costumes, that and it had like arms or body parts, and boots that you could pick, and then put together somebody that basically looked like that's their real clothing. Is that
Cl-
kind of the same ballpark?
Close, except when I work with renders, what we would do is you tell me what my character is wearing a sci-fi suit, and here's everything I can tell you about this suit, and then I can give you some suit options that there are, and then you can tell me that this is the pose that they're in. That's a difference from you tell a cover designer, find me some stock where the person is crouching. Okay, they will find you stock where they're crouching. Then you say, find me stock where they're wearing a pink shirt and crouching. While there might be lots of pink shirts, they won't all be crouching, right? Here we build a doll for you. Okay, we found the skin tone you want, the race you want. We gave him pointy ears. We found the outfit you want. We can put him into all sorts of different poses, and we can render one was them crouching, and one was them running, and one was them sleeping. We already created your doll to be put into different positions. So it's slightly different than just looking at body parts and doing photo manipulation from existing flat images.
Okay, great. I wanted to ask you about this because I think a lot of people are not going to be able to spend $750,000 on an illustration, especially for their first series. And it's cool that there's more options coming along that look a little more interesting than just this, especially in fantasy and sci-fi. It's really hard to find stock photos that work for your characters.
Exactly. For speculative fiction, for fantasy characters, if your character is just a girl wearing jeans, riding a bike, and you want her to look like a photo, then you're probably better off looking at photos.
All right, well, I want to ask you a few questions about what you're doing for marketing, since as I mentioned in the beginning, your books are really doing well. Um, I guess let's go back to the beginning. How did your first book launch with Penguin go? And did you learn things from that you were able to apply to your indie career?
No, there was no overlap between the way my traditional launch went versus my indie launch. Traditional books, they primary okay, backing up. I'm a firm believer that I, as an author, cannot sell a lot of books. Amazon can sell a lot of books. Barnes and Noble can send a lot of books. What I can do is convince those stores to push my book. Now, with traditional in and Penguin, I cannot do it directly, right? There is a person in Penguin who goes to Barnes and Noble, and Barnes and Noble places an order, right? And so Barnes and Noble's placed a bunch of orders for Cadet of Tildor. libraries placed orders for Cadet of Tildor. So how much I try to stand on my head and tell lots of readers to go buy my books. What effect that had, I don't know. I can't measure it. In retrospect, whatever effect that had would still be a small fraction of the effect that the Penguin sellers had when talking to Barnes and Nobles or talking to Walmart or talking to whoever they're talking to. Uh, when I'm talking on the indie side, it's a completely different ball game because now there is nobody in between me and Amazon, right? So now I get to market and I see my effects. I get to play with the price, which is something in the traditional world I couldn't do at all. So a lot of my marketing efforts currently rely on tools that are just not available to you in the traditional world. In the traditional world, you are being an ambassador for your brand, right? A lot of times, young adult authors work well with schools, um, where they are going in and schools are making large purchases of the books. Again, that's different. You're kind of trying to present yourself to a school, to an organization. You write about autism and you work with Autism Speaks, and then they promote your book, right? So you're working with organizations. Here, I'm working much more on my indie side. I'm working much more directly with marketing to fans directly, in such a way that shows Amazon that my book is worth recommending. Ultimately, that is what I need to do, is to convince Amazon that my book is worth recommending so that Amazon starts recommending it to others. And price point is something I can use to manipulate it. Amazon advertising is something I can use to manipulate it. And of course, the traditional advertising, I should use the word traditional, the common advertising routes indies use.
Now, this is interesting. Like, we've had a couple of people who've been traditionally published on the show, but it's interesting to hear this where you talk about how the publisher is interested in selling a book to booksellers. Which almost sort of puts it puts your class of possible success has already been established before you even start pushing the book, because you can only sell as many books as they put out there for people to buy.
Correct. When you go to Barnes and Nobles and there is a big stack of books, right, all before the register facing out, those books didn't, hitchhike themselves there. The publisher paid Barnes and Noble a lot of money to create that display. Now, will they choose to create that display with your book or not is going to have an impact on how well your book sells. And you as the author have very little chance to influence a major publisher's decision to pay $60,000 for that display.
Right. Okay. And the other thing I'm curious about this is you talked about how when you were developing the book, you had the developmental editor who was really helping you out. But you also talked about how basically the publisher sees you as a contractor who is producing a product for them to sell. Did the publisher sort of give you any guidance on what they expected from you during the promotion, or was it sort of, thank for the book, let's go sell it now?
I'm going to go back to what you said just to make sure we're on the same page. When I talk about Penguin and I talk about my editor in Penguin, that editor is the face of Penguin that faces me. So everything about what they do goes through my editor, whatever I'm talking about. So yes, they said, absolutely, here is a list of suggestions we have for you to go market your book. Tell people about your book, have a good social media presence. Here's your standard list of things to do. But when I say contractor and developmental editor and publisher, I want to be clear that the editor is the publisher, my point of contact there. So it's all one and the same.
Okay. So my question for you is, we've heard from many traditional authors who say that they, the author, have no control over the price. Did that have any influence on you releasing titles as an indie author?
Yes, in that I wanted to run a business, and part of the business is, as an indie, is controlling the price. So I'd say it wasn't that specific fact that I can control the price. It was the fact that I was looking at indie as a business, and that is one of the aspects that I would expect to control in my business, in my personal business.
It looks like you're all in with KDP Select and Kindle Unlimited. Is that something you started out doing right off the bat, or have you played with going into the other stores at all?
I have been in KU since I started, with one exception: to get a BookBub. I thought I would have greater chances of getting a BookBub if I was wide. And in fact, when I applied to the BookBub, I said that after date X, my book, Aaron Ash at the time, would be wide. And my plan was, if they gave me a BookBub, I'd be wide. And if they didn't, then I would have changed my mind and stayed in KU. That experiment, I got the BookBub, and when I saw the sales, the percentage of sales that came from Amazon were so much greater, even with the BookBub, than the sales that came from other avenues. After that BookBub was over, I had returned to Amazon and to KU. I bet the next question is why.
No, it actually makes good sense that, and I was going to ask, because you seem to analyze stuff, that
I
you
do.
ever thought about wide, and if Amazon, and your answer makes perfect sense, that the majority of the sales do come from there for most authors.
I can't speak for most authors. I will say that it's true for me. I do know a lot of authors who have established themselves wide and are doing very well. There are lots of very good reasons to go wide. I will say two reasons why KU is right for me, and those reasons are important because if somebody's personal stance doesn't match those reasons, then the conclusion is going to be different. So one, I have only so much bandwidth for marketing. Being exclusive to Amazon uh, makes it easier for me to market, because I'm only marketing for a single platform. When you're wide, you need to be marketing in various other platforms, and I just don't have the bandwidth for it right now. Two is, I believe KU is very good for the first few months of a book's release. Amazon gives you a rank boost. Does a rank boost matter? It depends what game you're playing. The game I'm playing is about getting Amazon to recommend my books a lot. I'm also competing for the all-star titles, right? And the all-star bonuses, which affects my release dates, by the way. So for that, I need to focus my strategy, since I'm competing for the all-star bonus, since I want to capitalize on that first few months where KU makes a difference. And since I don't have the bandwidth to do the kind of advertising you need for wide, I'm staying in KU. Have this conversation with me in a year when that 3 months period is over, and I'm not seeing as great a benefit, then I'm going to be possibly looking at wide. So I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but I have a very good reason why it's right for me right now in my business.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm wide with most of my stuff since I started that way, but I too have found that it's worth launching new series into KU. And for me, I've been leaving them there maybe 9 months, because after
Okay.
that it drops out of the top 100s for the rankings and stuff. So, and that's when I make them wide. And yeah, it's definitely worth going for the all-star bonuses and stuff. And I find that it's probably an advantage to have all your series in there. Of course it would be, but I can get them during the time I'm releasing a new series. So I understand that. And I'm curious, you mentioned you schedule your release dates around I assume trying to get like a full new month
Correct.
after a new release. Tell me about that. What are you doing? Any, do you have like a day picked out? Like the 21st is when I'm going to upload it.
So right now I'm trying to release in the beginning or the very, very end of the month, because the all-star bonuses are based on total page reads within a calendar month. And you're going to get your most page reads in that first part, right? And so I don't want to straddle 2 months where I'm going to get 15 days in one month and 15 days in another month. So I'm never going to have lots in one calendar month. Now, the difficulty in this is I also have my pre-order up as soon as I have my previous book in the series released. Now that creates a problem since it's a 90-day pre-order period and you have to put the pre-order up a little earlier. That staggers my days a little bit. So my Trial of Three is coming out September 26th. I would prefer it to come out October 1st, but I couldn't do that just the way the 90-day period worked out. So how I'm going to adjust for that is I'm going to have a sale on my first book in the series that's going to start October 1st. So I'm going to start a new sale and I'm going to push to try and generate lots in October because I'll be losing those 4 days in September. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you sort of answered the question I was going to ask, so I'm going to tweak my question a little bit. Obviously, KU and really any book release is very frequently the first couple of weeks that the actual release is when you're going to get the biggest rank boost and all that. So you sort of focus on that. Do you feel like that will be the same for books later in a series? Because naturally, people buying books later in the series have to have read the book earlier in the series. So is the launch still going to be, so vital, or will your marketing sort of still trend toward the first in the series?
Could you ask your question in a different way? I'm a little confused what you're asking.
Okay. As you get deeper into a series,
Okay.
do you think...
I'm releasing book 3 now. Okay.
Okay, so you're releasing book 3 now. Is most of your marketing going to be focused on getting a good release for book 3, or are you going to be splitting or focusing your marketing more on leading people toward book 1 so they have to filter through the whole series?
Okay. Caveating that this is for my reverse harem, which is a different marketing beast than young adult. If this had been a young adult, I would say I'm going fully for book 1. That I'm putting all my marketing dollars into book 1. I'm counting on Amazon's boost of book X to make it visible, but when people find it, they're still going to go to book 1. With the reverse harem, things are a little bit different because it is such a tight community. So, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I thought you had finished. I was going to ask my question. Go ahead and finish.
Oh, it's such a tight community. So while I'm going to push book 1 outside the community, inside the community, I'm going to push book 3.
You mentioned before that all your books are in KU, and many people know that I'm not too big of a fan there. Do you feel that KU is just for established authors, first-time authors, or pretty much anyone?
Anyone.
He said that awful darn quick. What makes you say that?
Going back to, in order for your book to sell, you have to market it you have to convince whatever platform you're using to market your book. I find for new authors, it's difficult enough to convince one platform that you're worthwhile and to convince Kobo and Barnes and Nobles and lots of platforms. So you can shotgun it out there, but unless you're actively working towards the algorithms of every platform, then so what? Kobo's algorithms work differently from Amazon's. While we don't know the exact algorithms, just kind of general analysis that they're working a little differently. So unless your market, also Kobo, for example, is much more Canada heavy. So if you're going to go to Kobo, are you ready with a marketing plan for Canada? Amazon is simpler. So if you have only X amount of bandwidth and you're going to only be able to focus on one thing as a new author, that's why I could say Amazon is good. Established authors, it depends on how you feel about business. I purely feel it's a business decision and how you feel your marketing plan and what bandwidth you have. The downside of KU is all your eggs are in one basket. Something happens, you're out of luck. You're not diversified. You're not built up on other platforms. KU is a quick peak in the beginning, but then are you really getting a benefit? A lot of established authors are going to say no, that once they go wide, they're not seeing a real drop in income once they're, but they are at that point spending a lot of money on marketing, so they may be marketing differently than a new author.
All right, really appreciate your analysis on this, Alex. We've definitely talked about KU a lot, but I feel like you have a really thoughtful approach and that you've weighed both sides. So I think people will appreciate that who are listening. We've been chatting for almost an hour, so just a couple more questions. I saw that you have audiobooks and also hardbacks on the books that you're self-publishing. How are you, I mean, audiobooks people can do through ACX, we've talked about that, but we hardly have anybody that does hardbacks. Could you talk about your experiences with those?
They're purely for self-satisfaction of knowing that I have a hardback. They're very easy to do in terms of they're just done through Ingram Spark, which is the same distributor that distributes my paperbacks to Barnes and Nobles and the rest. So when I set it up, my paperbacks in Ingram Spark, I just set up my hardbacks as well. So it's really not the effort involved in those existing is minimal. The sales numbers generated from those, I think my mom might have bought a copy.
All right, that's what I was curious about. If there was a financial reason that it was worth doing, or if it maybe is more of a fan thing.
It just looks good. I thought that it would look good on Amazon and other platforms to have more than one edition available. Also, it's a kind of carryover from my traditional, where it having a hardback and traditional carries meaning, right? Oh, they published it in hardback. It does not carry the same meaning in indie. It just means you bought an ISBN and went on Ingram Spark and filled in a few fields, but it still makes you feel good.
Well, sometimes making you feel good is worth the price of admission. But one of the questions I have is, when you have multiple formats like that, I am historically very bad about getting them out at the same time. Typically, I have ebook out on a regular release, and then the paperbacks and other formats follow afterward. Do you try to get those things all together and sort of release them on the same date?
Absolutely not. I have my paperback on Amazon before I have my ebook. The reason is I want my reviews to come in before the ebook launches. And if a paperback is up, then reviewers are able to leave reviews even though the ebook is still in pre-order. So you're going to see my paperback go up on Amazon before my ebook. In terms of hardcover, whenever I get through Ingram Spark, it's not instantaneous and they only push them, I think, once a month or updated. So that happens whenever it happens. That doesn't matter to me. It's not a big income generator. In terms of audio, that's a question of the producer's schedule and when I finish the book. So it always ends up being after the ebook, not by design, but just by practicality. So paperback, ebook, audio, and hardback whenever that happens.
With regards to your audiobooks, how involved are you in their creation? And what I mean by that is, do you listen to each chapter as it's created, and that way you can go, okay, you mispronounced this particular word, or this one's not quite right, or the dialect here is not quite right? Just wondering, how involved are you?
Very. So initially, when I talk with the narrator, we establish the character voices that are important to me. What kind of accent is important? Are we going to be doing this in RP, which is a British accent? Are we going to be doing it in an American accent? What we establish the main characters' voices, and I approve on those voices. Then the narrator goes and records the chapters. Yes, I will listen through all the chapters. I use Airtable, kind of keep a database of my notes. There is a repeated word, chapter 1, time point, 2 minutes and 13 seconds, repeated word. Now, where you don't want to go overboard unless there is a reason is artistic choices. Um, the characters that are not that are side characters, give my narrator free reign to make those decisions as to what they should sound like, unless it has a bearing on the plot, if I know something about the plot. For example, I had one instance in my Tides series where a side character, the narrator voiced him as being very young. And I knew, because of what would happen later in the book to that character, I did not want that to happen to a child. That would have changed a lot of things. So it was important for me that we go and we not voice them so young. We needed to voice them as an adult. So in that case, we went ahead and we changed the voice. But a lot of times, inexperienced narrators, and I've worked with awesome narrators, they just bring it to life.
So I'm glad I'm not that crazy one that listens to every second of the audiobook per chapter. I was like, okay, and to the point where I actually, to the point where I hear something, I'm like, I didn't write that. I grab my book and crap, I did. It'll be like writing something to the narrator. I know I shouldn't be asking this, but if you could do this, it'd be awesome. If not, no worries. And that's where I've had a really good narrator for me, that he says, oh yeah, sure, no problem, I'll do it. But,
awesome. It's good to cope up as a good narrator. Do you also do that voice check beforehand to get the main characters' voices on the same page?
Yeah. A lot of times I'll do the same thing. I'll leave it with artistic flair. Let's see how he does it. Really interesting to listen to it. If I find that he puts like one person, he starts talking as I say, and I had this happen, a very angry person or like a mean, dark spirited person, like, no, that's not how he's supposed to be. And I have to like, okay, FYI. But I've got the same guy now for quite a few books there, so he's got it down, so it's good.
Yeah, it's very good when you have that relationship established. It starts to go smoother. You know each other's expectations, right?
Exactly.
I think quite a few indie authors wonder, like, is it worth it to invest in audiobooks? I'm going to assume from how well you're selling the ebooks that you're able to cover, make it back the money and it's worth it. Do you have any thoughts on like how much you should be selling for ebooks before maybe it's worth investing $3,000 or $4,000 or whatever it might be for the production of audiobooks?
No, unfortunately, I don't have a number like that. What I will say is, royalty share is definitely a very good option, and you do have to be more patient. I've just had the pleasure. I have both books that are royalty share, and I have books that I do pay per finished hour, and I've just really lucked out with narrators. And sometimes, as a narrator, it happens to be her first book, but she's a voice actress in doing lots of other stuff. So, or they look and my decision point of whether I want to do royalty share, pay per hour is again a business decision. Do I want to share my royalties? And with Power of Five, the answer was no, I don't. And the narrator is going to be making the same decision. They're going to be looking at your books and going, do I want to be sharing those royalties? And oftentimes they say, yeah, I do, or they're building their resume. Or you have very, very different people have very different motivations, but there are amazing narrators out there. So what I would say is, if you're not ready to invest in pay per finished hour, then look at royalty share. And one, put up the audition. Two, make that audition not the first 2 pages of your book, but actually pick out a few short, important passages. You want that audition to be both short, so lots of people are willing to try it, but also get your key characters, get that dialogue in there. Rewrite a paragraph so that you have 5 people speaking instead of 2. And then go through and listen and invite people. Presume that out of every 4 people you invite, one will actually get back to you to audition. And that's how I ended up finding one of my very first narrator. I listened to a whole bunch of reels, and she blew me away. And then when we started working together, um, I just had this visceral experience when I heard her reading for my characters, and it's been an amazing, amazing partnership there.
That's awesome, and good advice for folks that have not done the audition process before, not to just open with your description or whatever your battle or whatever.
It's gonna tell you how the narrator narrates your battle, but it's not gonna say, do my characters sound like I want? Does this narrator have the range that I want? Can they voice a child and an old man? And if the answer is no, and that's important to you, you're not gonna get that from your opening chapter.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess just one more question. Have you done anything for marketing the audiobooks, or do they sell as a byproduct of the ebook marketing?
Good question. Yes, I have done some marketing for audiobooks. I don't know that it has had any effect. So specifically, my goal was to get 50 ratings, reviews on the audiobooks. So I did Audiobook Boom, which is you get people who are asking to listen to your book in exchange for leaving a review, which on Audible is actually specifically in their terms of service. That's why they give you free codes to give to potential reviewers. I did an audio blog tour. Again, my goal was to get those reviews. So I wasn't so much focusing on getting the marketing directly, but more by marketing by getting reviews and stars up there to have that social proof. I do have my audiobooks in my website very prominently. I'm hoping to collect bounties on the referral links, because those are very, very high. So if they're going to do something from my website, that is what I would like them to do.
Right, and maybe we should mention that because that's a recent change that now you have to use like an affiliate link code that Audible will give you, or ACX, and you can get $75 if somebody signs up to the program and picks up your book. Is that working for you? Have you got it up there now, you mentioned?
Yes, I have that now. What I also have is I use Link Rocket. I'm sure there are other services out there, but I embed my Facebook pixel and the referral link together, create a custom shortened URL. So every time somebody clicks, not only are they getting my referral link and taking to Audible as usual, but also Facebook records them. So when I later want to advertise to a returning audience, I've captured them by my Facebook pixel.
All right, very good tip. I have to remember to go find my link because I got a new audiobook coming out, and it was so much nicer when they just automatically gave you those $50 bounties. But hey, it's 75 now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've been writing down the links you gave us, so I will include those in the show notes for the episode in case people are listening at the gym and don't have a pen handy. But are there any things you want to say to wrap up, or and let people know where they can find you online, and maybe which of your first books or book openings to the series that they could pick up if they want to check out your work?
Absolutely. So you can find me at www.alexliddell.com, and I figured you're going to spell it in the links, right? You can also contact me on Facebook. If you're going to start looking at my books, I would recommend, if you are enjoying Reverse Harem or want to give that a try, Power of Five is about elite fave warriors. And if you're looking at more the young adult, I recommend Air and Ash, which is about a princess who pretends to be a common seaman and goes into the naval ship. So those are my recommendations. And then my questions to Lindsay and Jeff is, what do you think of Joe's corset?
Joe is looking so sexy tonight. You guys, if you're not watching the video, you're missing out.
You really are. I mean, I was surprised that he'd wear it on video, but it just looks amazing.
Just wait for the next Book of Deacon cover. It's going to be him on it.
It really defines my shape,
It takes a big man to wear a corset on YouTube.
But and then it makes you look like a slender man, so it's good.
It does. It's very good. It suits you.
All right, Alex, definitely a troublemaker. We have enjoyed talking with you, and I believe this is going to be episode 195. I will have the links to
What?
Alex's
I don't get
website.
666?
666. Boy, we got to keep recording for a long time to get up there. Come on by marketingsff.com, and I will have all the links, guys. And thank you so much for joining us tonight, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks for hanging out with us, Alex.
So long, everybody.